What's going on, everybody? Welcome into an all-new episode of the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. More importantly, we are joined once again by Paul Bretl. You can find him everywhere on ESPN Lacrosse. You can find him on Packers Wire. And maybe most importantly this week, you can also find him on the Colts Wire, which we're going to ask him maybe to take off that Packers hat for a minute, put on a little bit of that Colts hat. But Paul, welcome back to the show. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to talk ball with you again this year.
Yeah, always happy to be back talking football with you, Andy. Happy to be on weekly with you. And as you said, yes, got a little Colts background coming into this season. Sometimes in this industry, you got to wear a variety of hats, and so that's what we're doing. But again, I write about football, I talk about football. Never going to hear me complaining.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think it's so cool. And I think it's such an awesome opportunity to get, just the eyes on a different team. And I think, just from when I've done stuff, whether it's via the draft or when I've, tried to do some more national stuff, is you just get a better, more well-rounded feel for your own team by also seeing what other teams are doing and what their strengths are, weaknesses, how they go about things. You just get a better overall feel for everything. So I think it's a really cool opportunity. I'm super excited for you that you get to do it. And I'm excited for us today because you're now a super subject matter expert. You always are anyway, but now it's even more apropos this week when it's Packers Colts. Let's start from a Packers side of things. Let's start just with an injury report sort of thing. Today, we found out that Josh Jacobs, Kenny Clark, Corey Ballantyne, Marshawn Lloyd, and Quay Walker were all limited with an injury. All of that you can almost put to the side. The bigger injury news is that Jordan Love still did not practice. You were obviously around the team today. What was kind of the feel for the injury updates? And then there's also a little bit of an interesting note about Evan Williams as well. So I'll let you go through all of that.
Yeah, Jordan Love, as you said, did not practice. Matt LaFleur, he's still leaving that door open, talking with the receivers in the locker room there, more so using the terminology, the mindset of preparing for Malik Willis to be the quarterback. So I've thought this from the start. And again, this is my opinion, no insight whatsoever, but this just feels like gamesmanship to a degree on Matt LaFleur's part. If there's even a little portion of the week that the Colts are now devoting to Jordan Love, that's however long that is, 30 minutes, 3 hours, whatever it ends up being, that's that amount of time less that's going towards game planning for Malik Willis and the Packers offense in that regard. I do know Gus Bradley, the Colts defensive coordinator, was asked on Monday or Tuesday of this week, and he said that they're preparing for Malik Willis. So that's what their expectations are. Of course, that doesn't mean they're not doing some additional work on the back end, but at least from what he said earlier in the week, that's what they're preparing for. In regards to Evan Williams, yes, Jeff Hafley said today that they got to find a way to get him on the field. And in terms of how they go about that, I think is the big unknown. The easiest way, quote unquote, is you would move Javon Bullard to the slot, have Keyshawn Nixon come off the field, and then you'd have Evan Williams deep next to Xavier McKinney. But the way Jeff Hafley talked about Keyshawn Nixon, I don't expect that to happen. Hafley was just asked generally about the defense. It wasn't even a Keyshawn Nixon question. He started talking through all the things that he thought they did well in this past game, and then started going off on a tangent on everything that Nixon did from coverage standpoint, run defense, blitzing, just checking those boxes that you want to have from your nickel cornerback. So how the Packers are going to get them, the three safeties on the field together, that's kind of the big question mark. It seems like they'd almost have to drop one of them down into the box while still having the two deep back there, because again, just based off what Hafley said, it doesn't sound like Nixon's going to be coming off the field, or if he does, it isn't going to be for an extended period.
That doesn't surprise me. It just felt like even going into that game that Nixon's just a better cover guy, in my opinion, than Bullard. And it just feels a little bit more like that's sort of what they want. And Nixon is a little bit more of, you can do almost a little bit of anything. You can cover, you can blitz, you can run, defend, just as you mentioned that Hafley said today. I almost wonder if this is not like it's almost going to feel like a demotion after Javon Bullard played the entire game this past week. My expectation going in was that, maybe Evan Williams would get 45 snaps, or sorry, that Javon Bullard would get 45 snaps and like Evan Williams would get 15, 20 of those. And that just made it felt a little bit more natural of like, hey, let's get both of these guys on the field. Why are we throwing Javon Bullard to 65 snaps right away? Maybe getting him out and just keeping him fresh. And also I don't even think from like a physical standpoint, because he was flying around the entirety of the game, but just from a mental standpoint, like 65 snaps, first game in, you're playing every single down, you're doing everything. Like, can we maybe just scale that a little bit back so that he doesn't have to be out there on every play? And can Evan Williams take 15 to 20 of those, and let's see what he's got, and more than anything, just to get his feet wet on it. So I'm wondering if this week, if we don't see, maybe it's even like hey, if we're in 4-3, it's going to be Evan. Or if there's a certain nickel package where maybe we're going to do a nickel package that includes both Edgerrin Cooper at linebacker and Evan Williams at safety, and just to give a different look out there. I don't know what it is, but it just feels like I've been saying this probably too much this week already, but the words or the theme that we heard last year from Goody and Matt LaFleur about the rookies last year and how they were able to improve so quickly was because they were able to get out on the field, they were able to gain experience, and that's how they came along and developed through the course of the year. And it just feels like, all right, let's start seeing a little bit more Jordan Morgan, a little bit more Edgerrin Cooper, which it sounds like we're going to get, a little bit more Evan Williams. And then I'm not, again, saying it needs to be massively less Javon Bullard, but if that means a handful of more reps or just any reps for Evan Williams, I think that could potentially make some sense.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. And it kind of flip-flopped for how it played out at cornerback and safety, flip-flop from what I thought. Because like you said, I think going into it, thought Bullard was going to take most of the reps because that's what we saw during last 3 weeks of training camp, like this long period of time. But because of Williams' play, you thought he's going to get worked in. Bullard played all the snaps. Then at cornerback, where Carrington Valentine's been working his way back from injury, they've raved about Eric Stokes' play this summer. Carrington Valentine got 10, 11 snaps just kind of sporadically here and there throughout the game. So I agree. It definitely feels like that's how they're going to integrate Evan Williams back into the defense to get him on the field, because he's just around the ball. He has this ball hawking ability. In the locker room a few weeks ago, Jair Alexander was asked about Evan Williams. He compared him to Micah Hyde, like just has this innate ability to be in the right spot at the right time and to make those plays on the ball. And obviously you want those guys on the field.
I don't want to spend too much time on this because it's now Friday when people are listening to this. And obviously we are on to Packers Colts, but haven't had the opportunity to touch base with you since Packers Eagles, which is already basically a week ago, which is crazy when people are listening to this. But just any kind of quick takeaways or anything interesting that you had that you kind of went back and thought about it more, or, any just 10,000 foot view things from that game.
Yeah, just the big one. Packers let that one go. Way, way, way too many self-inflicted wounds, not capitalizing on turnovers. The struggles in the red zone, penalties, taking big plays off the board. I mean, you can even look at, and smaller is the wrong word here, but the missed field goal attempt by Narveson. All of a sudden, it's a 2-point game at the end. If Nixon doesn't take the ball out, you start at the 30, you connect on that pass to Jaden Reed. Like, again, I know I'm doing a lot of if here, but just little things like that along the way, that like those final plays, the complexion of it has just changed drastically from maybe Nixon stays in and takes a knee, or maybe that field goal goes through, and instead of trying to set up a Hail Mary, it's like, hey, we only need 10 more yards to get into field goal range, or whatever it ended up being. So just so many self-inflicted wounds, Packers getting in the way of themselves, beating themselves in that game. So honestly, that was kind of the big thing for me.
Yeah, we've definitely discussed it all week. The amount of mistakes in that game. I had 39, and I didn't even have the Nixon return or the Jair return out of the end zone. After I went back and rewatched that game immediately, just too many of that, too many mistakes, too many errors, too many points left on the field, and those are the things that they have to get cleaned up this week, especially with the likelihood that it is a backup quarterback for Green Bay. You don't want to be in a position where you're missing field goals, you're taking points off the board, any of that. It's just a recipe for disaster. They got to figure out a way to just score one more point than Indy in this game. And that's going to take, I think, everyone working a lot more efficiently maybe than what we saw from a week ago. All right, let's move on to Packers Colts. And I want to actually start with last week's game, because again, I know you obviously went back and covered this for the Colts side of things. So Colts Texans, let's start there. What do we need to know about what kind of happened in that game?
Yeah, so the big thing on the defensive side of the ball for the Colts, I'm sure everyone saw Joe Mixon, Texans offense. They ran crazy in that game. I think total rushing yards were 213 for the Texans. Joe Mixon had 159, and it was just a constant pounding of the football. Like, I think Joe Mixon's longest run was 13 yards. Usually I think when you see a 160-yard performance, there might be a 30-yard run, a 20-yard run sprinkled in there. It was a lot of 5, 6, 7-yard gains, just running it right at the Colts. And a big product of that, one, you give up that many yards, there's poor play involved. But Gus Bradley deployed a lot of lighter boxes in that game, because we'll get to it here in a bit, but that Colts secondary is a massive question mark. And you're going against the Texans offense that had Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins, Tank Dell. They were devoting additional defenders to help more so on the back end. There were lighter boxes that the Texans were able to take advantage of in that regard. And that led to just a massive advantage for the Texans in time of possession. They held the ball for 20 more minutes than the Indianapolis Colts. I think they ran 76 plays to the Colts 43. So just right off the bat, that aspect of it, a massive disadvantage. Honestly, the fact that the Colts were were in the game up until the end, a credit to the offense. On the offensive side of the ball, big takeaway, Anthony Richardson. We saw that massive sky-high ceiling that he possesses, that rare combination of the size, the athleticism, the arm strength, the arm talent was all on display in that game. Also on display in that game was the inexperience. There were a number of missed throws from Richardson in the passing game, more of the layups, the ones that are all right, we got to hit those. That contributed to the short drives that they had. It was a very boomer bust performance for the offense. They had the 3 plays of over 50 yards. 2 of them went for touchdowns. 1 eventually led to a touchdown. But other than that, the passing game was inconsistent, which again, he's a young quarterback. He only played 4 games last season. He's still in that learning phase, that development phase. He's going through the ups and downs. And we very much saw that. But if you're a Colts fan and you're watching that game, I would have left there incredibly optimistic just about what's to come. Because again, if I'm watching that, I would rather have my young quarterback connecting on those throws. We'll figure out the layups rather than it being the other way around. One other thing I'll add, I think uncharacteristically, it was tough sledding in the run game on offense for the Colts. Jonathan Taylor averaged only 3 yards per rush in that game. And again, with the kind of general inconsistency in the passing game, when you're struggling to get going on the ground, it's hard to sustain drives in that regard too. So those kind of factors were the big takeaway. And again, the Texans' ability to move the ball on the ground, I think, played a massive factor in the outcome.
Colts need to get their running game back on track. Boy, do I have a defense for you. Hopefully Green Bay is up to the task and can keep Jonathan Taylor a little bit struggling there. We got obviously an updated injury report from both sides today. We went over the Packers side of things, but there's some very interesting names on this Colts injury report as well.
Yeah, 3 big defensive starters: DeForest Buckner, defensive tackle, defensive end Kwity Paye, and Julian Blackmon. They're strong safety. So DeForest Buckner, he left the game late on Sunday with a back injury, and he said today via The Athletic that he's a game time decision at this point. So he hasn't practiced the first 2 days this week. I'm guessing right now they're just taking the rest approach because a player of DeForest Buckner's caliber doesn't exactly need to be practicing to go out and wreak some havoc on Sunday. So obviously that's a huge one to watch. Kwity Paye at defensive end, he's dealing with a hamstring injury. He had a really impressive performance on Sunday from a pass rush standpoint, getting after the quarterback. Put together a really impressive offseason. He talked about how he had worked out 4 or 5 days a week, put on muscle, lost 15 pounds. And the big thing for him is he's been a steady presence in the run game. It's just that added consistency from a pass rush presence. And again, one game sample size, but definitely looked like that burst and that he wanted to drop some weight so he could maintain his high level of play going into the fourth quarter as the game went on. And we saw that on Sunday. So again, any one of those guys is out, that's a massive impact on Sunday's game. And then Julian Blackmon, he's dealing with a shoulder injury. He played 100% of the snaps on Sunday. So I'm not exactly sure when or how that injury popped up. I don't know what the specifics of it are, but last season, his 2023 season was cut short because of a shoulder injury. Again, I don't even know if it's been reported, if it's the same one as last year, if it's the same type of injury. So I'm not making that quite connection, but obviously something worth monitoring. And as we get into kind of strengths, weaknesses of this team, not having Julian Blackmon on the back end of that secondary, it would carry a massive impact on this game.
Not to mention Juju Brents, who out for the season with a knee injury this week as well, at a position that they are already, not to spoil the next topic, but a little bit weak from a depth standpoint. And let's start on the strengths side of things for the Colts. What is it about this Colts team that Green Bay maybe should be a little bit worried about, and something that that the Colts can kind of lean on a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to mention one more on the injury report. Josh Downs, he's been limited the last 2 days. He had the high ankle sprain they suffered early on in training camp. Didn't play last week. He said to, I believe it was one of the Athletics reporters, that he's in the 80 to 90% range in terms of how he's feeling. But at the beginning, we talked about the consistency component of the passing game for the Colts. He's going to bring that element. I mean, he, as a rookie last year, I think it flew under the radar, but he was one of the most productive slot receivers in football, had 780 receiving yards, a couple touchdowns, and he was having a really good offseason. and training camp prior to the injury. The Shane Steichen, the Colts head coach, had talked about this. The rapport that him and Richardson have developed together, like Josh Downs in those early practices, he was a go-to target for Richardson. So his ability to be on the field Sunday, I think, would definitely help bring some of that consistency. We talked about the passing game to that Colts offense. So another big one to keep our eyes on.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. And I mean, to me, that very much flew under the radar. That I'm almost, not obviously from a touchdown standpoint, but not too far from Jaden Reed numbers for Josh Downs. So that's very impressive. And maybe just rest it one more week. Make sure you're 100% for the following week is probably good advice there for Josh Downs.
Absolutely. And then as far as the strengths for the Colts, it starts in the trenches on both sides of the ball. Chris Ballard, the Colts GM, has invested incredibly heavily into the offensive and defensive lines. I think 3 of the Colts' 4 highest cap hits on the team belong to their offensive line unit. On the defensive side of the ball, they picked up Kwity Paye's 5th-year option this year. They extended DeForest Buckner. They extended Grover Stewart. They spent their first-round pick to draft Laiatu Latu out of UCLA, the first defender taken off the board. They re-signed Tyquan Lewis, providing some defensive end depth. They only made 2 additions in free agency, Joe Flacco and Raekwon Davis. So again, they invested incredibly heavily into that defensive front. And I know the run game perspective, things didn't turn out well this past week, but where that unit's at its best and they can really just cause some havoc, it's as a pass rush group. That group they generated the 5th most sacks last season. Again, we talk about the guys that are returning. They added Latu to the mix, first defender drafted off the board. And I mean, he's looked the part since joining the Colts, whether it's one-on-ones, team drills, the preseason. I mean, he's been a disruptive force at that defensive end position. So that group is really going to test the Packers' offensive line unit from a pass rush perspective. And I asked Matt LaFleur about that, and he just talked about how their ability on the stunts to create rushing lanes for each other. They just play like a cohesive unit, and what they really, really take pride in is the depth of that unit and having 8-9 guys that they feel that they can lean on heavily each week and just continue to rotate through. So that Colts pass rush is going to be a good test for the Packers offensive line. Then on the offensive side of the ball, they're returning all 5 starters on the offensive line from a unit that ranked top 10 in pressure rate last season on the good side, on the low end, and then top 10 in yards per carry from the run game perspective. So that's a really, really tough unit. The Packers, who didn't generate a ton of pressures last week against Philadelphia, again, for different reasons I'm sure we'll discuss here in a bit. But again, it's going to be a tough test for that Packers D-line.
Yeah, they have to be more impactful than they were. And to your point, we can kind of discuss it a little bit. Field conditions, I'm sure, played a part. Clearly, they were trying to maintain and contain, I should say, Jalen Hurts, which is another potential option this week for Anthony Richardson that I want to pick your brain on. Is this more of, do they need to get after him more, or do they need to kind of contain him in the pocket? So let's get there in just a moment. But before we get there, what are some of the weaknesses for this Colts team that maybe Green Bay can exploit?
Yeah, the big one's the secondary. This was a group last year that, because of injuries, they had to rely heavily on a young core in that secondary. And when I'm talking about the secondary, I'm excluding Julian Blackmon at strong safety, and I'm excluding Kenny Moore in the slot. Those are the 2 that are providing any sort of stability to the back end of that Colts group. But they ranked in the bottom half of the NFL last season in explosive plays allowed, bottom 3rd in yards per pass attempt for quarterbacks, bottom 3rd in passes defensed, and just couldn't come up with those big plays when needed. This offseason, going into the draft, there are a lot out there who thought that addressing the cornerback or even the safety position was going to be an early round pick for the Indianapolis Colts. But Chris Ballard, he's sticking with the group that he has. He's very much the draft and develop. And you can understand, again, they had Juju Brents, who they drafted in the 2nd round last year. They had Jalen Jones, who they drafted in the 7th round in 2023. But because of injuries, he got a ton of playing time last year. So for a draft and develop general manager, you can understand why, all right, it's year 2. I want to see what these guys can do. Like you may not like it, but you can understand the thought process behind it. Where they're getting really hurt right now is the depth. Ballard did not go out and add to the depth of that unit. And now with Juju Brents on IR, their starting boundary cornerback is either going to be Dallas Flowers, who's coming off an Achilles injury, and up to this point through training camp and the preseason games, he just hasn't looked like himself yet. And I think they say that an Achilles injury can sometimes take a full year of being back before that player starts to look like themselves again. And Dallas Flowers was a healthy scratch in week one. Gus Bradley said it was for special teams. It was a special teams decision, but at a cornerback position where you're already pretty thin, and again, that was before the Brents injury, and your guy who's been your backup throughout training camp is a healthy scratch, he might be one of the starters. The other potential starter is Sam Womack, who they claimed off waivers during cutdowns from the 49ers. He's got like 200 career defensive snaps. He put together a good preseason, but the Colts actually were planning he has boundary and slot experience, but I think the Colts wanted him to be more of a backup nickel to Kenny Moore.
Got it.
So he could potentially be, again, starting opposite of Jalen Jones. Then you go to the safety position, and we just talked about Julian Blackmon being injured. If he's not able to go, they might be starting Ronnie Harrison off the practice squad, who they just signed back this week. They have Nick Cross, who's been very up and down up to this point in his career. And so as I'm thinking through what are the Packers going to do in this game, you got the backup quarterback. He's only been here for 3 weeks. Like, the Colts just gave up a ton of yards on the ground. Like, everything in that regard says run the ball, run the ball, run the ball. And that's going to be important. Don't get me wrong. But if you're looking at this and you're looking at matchups and you're going, how do we take advantage of the weakness? I don't think there's a bigger discrepancy in matchups when it comes to the Packers receivers versus the Colts cornerbacks. And for Matt LaFleur, who wants to throw the ball, you know that. Like, I think that's going to be tough at times to stick to and just keep running the ball. So I think there's, whether the Packers capitalize on the opportunity with Malik Willis, I mean, that's the question mark. We don't know.
Right.
But from an X's and O's, from a matchup perspective, it really feels like there's going to be opportunities there for that Packers passing game.
It makes it so painful that Jordan is out for this game, because you look at that matchup and you're just drooling if Jordan's out there that they can pick that secondary apart. Now, I think it still gives hope and optimism for a quarterback that, probably could use some open receivers and not have to kind of throw a bunch of contested stuff. So if those wide receivers can get open against those corners and give Malik just some easy looks, maybe there's an avenue there for success. But man, it would be nice to have Jordan and all those wide receivers just hopefully getting open and picking them apart. But you have to play with the hand that you're dealt, and it'll be up to Malik Willis to complete those passes that could be there for him if that secondary is not up to snuff for Indianapolis. Let's talk a little bit. We kind of talked here about Malik Willis a little bit, running the ball and obviously making sure that you're taking advantage of some of those mismatches. I'll let you get if there's anything else you think from a game planning standpoint from Malik Willis in the offense, but almost maybe more importantly, how do you game plan against Anthony Richardson and his sort of dual threat ability to beat you? Literally might be a 70-yard dart down the other side of the field, can beat you with his legs. He's a massively talented QB.
Yeah, like I said, the upside is it's sky high for him, and we caught glimpses of it week one. So, like I said, Colts fans have to be thrilled. As far as what the Packers should do, I go back and forth on this. We all know the importance of pressure and getting after the quarterback, and Matt LaFleur said after the Eagles game that the pass rush didn't affect the game as much as he would have liked, and to a degree, that was part of the Packers game plan. Again, you always want to get pressures every play that you can. But going against a mobile quarterback in Jalen Hurts, and Kenny Clark talked about this, it was their plan to keep him in the pocket. That was their goal. And in doing that, and correct me if I'm not describing this correctly, but when you go with more of a controlled power rush, your goal, you're not going to cause that same chaos like we saw over summer. And Hafley even talked about that, where he alluded to, you guys saw some of these guys just flying off the ball, going upfield as fast as they can. That wasn't the design of last week's game plan. It wasn't what they were trying to do. And now they're going against a quarterback who presents, a similar challenge in that regard from a mobility standpoint. So that's the battle. That's the balance that the Packers have to strike. Do you take that controlled approach, keep them in the pocket, knowing you might not generate the same pressures, or do you try to get after him, knowing there's going to be running lanes, he gets outside and is able to take off? I think what you do at this point, and it's probably not the approach that many fans want to hear. I almost think you take that more controlled approach. You take away the deep passes and force Anthony Richardson to show you that he can put together 8, 10, 12 play scoring drives to move the ball down the field. We know he has the electric ability with the arm to connect on the big plays. We know he has the electric ability with his legs to extend plays. I think he had 56 rushing yards on 6 carries against the Houston Texans. So make him put together those long drives where he has to hit those consecutive completions in a row to pick up the key third downs. And then again, if they're doing that, if they're finding success in the run game, if they're able to put those drives together, obviously you got to make an adjustment at some point, but it's really pick your poison. You can try to justify it either way you want and which route you want to go and what you think is best, but you're going to be exposed in another area. But again, what hasn't he shown us up to this point? And again, it's a super small sample size, but just the consistency to string those long drives together. So try to make him do that.
So what you're saying is hashtag hire Joe Barry is what you're saying here. I'm obviously being facetious, but no, I don't disagree at all. And I think what we're going to see, hopefully with better success, is I think it's going to be a very similar game plan. And there were times where Green Bay got aggressive and blitz. We saw Keyshawn coming off the edge. We saw Quay blitz a couple times. I think we're going to see that. I think Edgerrin will come a couple times in this game if he gets that extended playing time that we're thinking. They just need to be better and more disciplined and actually get home on a couple of those. And then, yes, it is good for them to keep Anthony Richardson in the pocket, but you also don't just want to stay on your block and just sort of do that, lineman dance where you're not getting any sort of push into the pocket. And we saw that Jalen Hurts just had far too much time to throw on a couple of those different occasions. I think it's going to be important that whether it's them designating a guy of like, all right, this down, Devontae, you're getting after the quarterback. The rest of us are going to be a little bit more passive in our approach, but we got to get one of those guys that is just pinning their ears back and trying to get to the quarterback. Or maybe you do get Edgerrin in this game more and just put him as a spy. And I get you can't just do that every single down, but do you get him as a spy and let those four guys go and get after the quarterback? And if he takes off, all right, we're just going to let Edgerrin go and chase. And maybe that can be something that works. There's not going to be one specific formula that works here. They're going to have to be multiple. They're going to have to be disciplined, and they're just going to have to kind of, to your point, maybe try the little bit more passive approach first. And then if that doesn't work, then you might have to turn up the heat a little bit and, just kind of hope that you get the results that you want. I'm going to be very interested to see how Jeff Hafley plays this one, but in a way, I expect a similar game plan with hopefully better execution than what we saw against the Eagles.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just be clear. I'm not calling for the 2023 Tampa Bay Buccaneers game plan from the Packers here.
Yes. No. I totally agree. That's not a game plan anyone wants to see ever again. All right. We'll do just kind of lightning round as we kind of wrap things up here. Your keys to the game in this one.
Yeah. So Packers offense, get Josh Jacobs going. I know we talked about the opportunities in the passing game, but those do not exist whatsoever if Josh Jacobs is struggling in the run game.
Yeah.
Get the run game going. Put yourself in second and short, third and short, manageable situations for Malik Willis. That's going to do wonders for him in the passing game. It opens up the entire playbook for the floor. It forces the Colts defense to have to defend the entire field. There's better spacing, more opportunities are generated in the passing game. You have play action. Conversely, if you're struggling in the run game, and even last year's offense, like as they were trying to get going in the first half of the season, the run game struggles were contributing to that. You're facing 2nd and 8, 3rd and 10 predictable passing situations. All of a sudden, the pass rush, which we talked about as a strength of this Colts team, they're pinning their ears back, able to get after you. From a coverage standpoint, the secondary has the advantage. When it's 3rd and 10, 3rd and 12, 2nd and 8, there's only so many routes you can run in those type of situations. The secondary has the advantage in that regard. So Packers offense, get the run game going. From the defensive perspective, the thing that stands out to me is like we just talked about it. You got to get after the quarterback, regardless of what the approach is that the Packers take from how they want to either contain Richardson or try to get after him. You got to find a way to get after him with more consistency, to get him off his spot, to rush him, throw off his timing and rhythm, because regardless of what the matchup is, secondary versus receivers, if you're asking your secondary to consistently have to defend for 3-4 seconds, and this is a Colts wide receiver room that has Michael Pittman, as reliable as they come. Alec Pierce has had a really, really good training camp and emerged. We saw his big receptions in the week one. And then Adonai Mitchell, the rookie from Texas. I mean, Michael Pittman complimented him this summer that he has some of the best releases at the line of scrimmage that he's seen. Like AD Mitchell, between the releases, the explosiveness that he has, he ran a 4.34 40. Like, he is someone who can impact all parts of the field. So again, you leave that group 3-4 seconds of time with Richardson, his arm, not a recipe for success. And I talked about some of those misses that Richardson had last week. 2 of them were to Mitchell that would have been easy touchdowns.
Yeah.
So he showed right off the bat, Mitchell, the ability to create separation, to get in space. And again, it's just working out the connection between him and Richardson. Before his debut of, I think, 1 reception for 4 yards was nearly 3 receptions for about 90 yards and 2 scores. So definitely someone for the Packers to be mindful of.
Yeah, I'm going to be very interested to see some of the corner matchups in this game and how they match up with some of those Colts wide receivers. I think that could be a very interesting aspect in this one. Speaking of which, what is a matchup that you cannot wait to watch in this one?
So I always tend to go back to the offensive line and defensive line play. There's just so much of the game is determined right there. You control line of scrimmage, you control the game. So I'm really excited to watch some of the best versus the best. Kenny Clark against Quentin Nelson, Kenny Clark against Ryan Kelly in the trenches. I think just again, the importance that element has on the entire football game. We've talked about if you can get the run game going. We all know how important it is to generate pressure versus having time in the pocket. When you get Kenny Clark going up against one of the best guards in football, one of the best centers in football, it's an exciting matchup in my mind.
And then last but not least, I'll let you go in any direction that you want with this. It can be a score prediction, a game prediction, something that you think will happen in the game. Do you have any sort of prediction for this one?
That's a great question. I've really gone back and forth on this, on who I'm going to pick as the winner. And I won't go score prediction, but right now I'll pick the Colts to win this one. And it just comes down to the unknown around Malik Willis. I mean, one, he's been in Green Bay for barely over 2 weeks. Two, he has, I think, 67 career pass attempts over a little over 2+ seasons. There is just so much unknown right now. And, we've talked about the ways that the Packers could potentially find some advantages for him and find a way to exploit, some of the weaknesses in the Colts defense. But again, that all comes down to how he plays and if he's able to take advantage of that, which again, nobody knows right now. That's the big thing with all this.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I think we all want to think of a best case scenario here. Like Jordan had how many years in this offense, and they were how long did it take them to sort of figure it out last year? And that's like a first round pick who'd had 3 years to sit and learn the offense, and that took time. And it's just kind of, as you were talking today, one of the things that really kind of resonated with me is last year they tried to put the training wheels on Jordan early, and nothing really worked. The Chicago game, the first game being a little bit of a difference, but you could just tell they were doing too much screens and too much running. It had no rhythm to the offense. It didn't feel like there was ever any trust. I'm going to be very interested to see how many of those training wheels are on for Malik Willis, or if they do say, hey, we're going to spread things out a little bit. We're going to get those mismatches, and we're going to give you 2 reads. You read it. If it's not there, you run it. I'm very intrigued to see how they handle Malik Willis in this one. If they, again, scale it back entirely, and this is a watered down peewee football offense, or if this is hey, we're giving you a portion of what we really like to do. You got to go execute it, and let's see what you got. This could go in either way, and I'm very, very intrigued, and I can't wait to be at this game. I know you'll be there as well. Paul, phenomenal stuff as always. Where can we find all of your great work?
I appreciate it, Andy. Follow me on Twitter, Paul_Bretl. Find all my Packers work over at ESPNlacrosse.com.
Yeah, make sure to follow him again at Paul_Bretl. You can find me at Andy Herman NFL. You can follow the podcast at Pack-A-Day Podcast. That's going to do it for Paul and I. But until next time, and as always, go Pack, go.